Welcome to the My House Podcast, a show about the past, present, and future goings-on at the My House Youth Drop-In Center in Wasilla, Alaska, with your host, Michelle Overstreet.
Hi, welcome to episode 41 of the My House Podcast. I'm Michelle Overstreet, and today I'm joined by Bryan, who is one of our case managers here at My House, and Isaac, our production manager.
What's up?
Isaac, do you have any housekeeping for us, Isaac, as we get started?
Episodes of My Voice that are dropping right now with a client who was actually on My Voice before, which I'm super excited about. At the time we're recording this, I still haven't listened to it. I wasn't in the session. I was doing other work, and Ozzy was at the table. So, but from everything I hear, it went super great. So I'm
I really
excited
enjoyed
to listen
it,
to it,
and I think everybody's going to enjoy it. We briefly talk about what we're going to talk about today, so I'm really excited for that episode.
Oh, good.
And there's a Diag Nonsense episode coming out next week when this is dropping, and that will be with two special guests from another very popular podcast talking about it's time for another movie review.
Well, that'll be fun. I can't wait to hear that. We had a great conversation, just sort of a sidebar conversation in the drop-in center a few weeks ago, just talking about addiction in the community, how to help a friend. What do you do if you're a family member? Can I talk about the new podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
I mean, we're going to launch a 12 episode special edition podcast that Bryan is going to host around recovery.
Yeah, it's going to be super awesome. Isaac's going to co-host it with me as like an outsider perspective of it, which is going to be really cool to hear his questions and feed into that conversation for people that don't know anything about the 12 steps, and kind of just try to break it down and make it simple for people to understand.
Yeah, I'm super excited. That's born of the fact that Bryan and Michelle Parker were having a conversation in the case management area, and I butt in like I usually do when I'm just out there walking, because they were talking about 12 steps, and Bryan said something. I don't know. I don't want to spoil any of our episode ideas or what we'll be talking about, but Bryan said something, and I was like, what does that even mean? And I got into this whole conversation about 12 steps, which the only thing I knew about 12 steps was the scene out of Finding Nemo where the sharks are in the eating fish recovery group. So, and like whatever I've gleaned from here. So yeah, I'm super excited for this. We're going to finish up this season of My Voice. I guess we're going back to housekeeping really quick. We're going to finish this season of My Voice. And after we're done with our 10th episode of season 3 of My Voice, we're going to, when we take a break from My Voice, we're going to be using that time to do this limited series about the 12 steps, and we're going to bring in some clients, some staff that are former clients, some people from outside the building that have gone through 12 steps or worked a lot with people that have been going through the steps. So I think I was so surprised when we got in this conversation to, like, it was super interesting to me. Like, the more we dived into it as someone that hasn't worked the 12 steps and just kind of knows tangentially just from working here kind of what it's about, but also not really. So I think for people that have worked the steps, it'll be fun. It'll be, something that, I don't want to say informative if they've worked the steps, but definitely something that they can connect with, and it'll be cool to have a conversation around it. And for people that haven't worked the 12 steps, I think it'll offer a lot of insight into kind of the recovery community and what a lot of individuals that are starting their recovery or in long-term recovery are doing. Because I know a lot of folks. We have a lot of folks around the building that have worked the steps. It's great.
I was excited about the aspect of not only sharing the 12-step information with the community, but having family members. Yeah. We had a great conversation, Bryan, about, what it's like to have a family member with an addiction. And when you don't know anything about treatment or recovery, how do you help them?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's a really hard topic, I think, for some people to talk about. And I think I always talk about, people like to say, like, out of sight, out of mind, and all of those different types of things. And it really boils down to, what we were talking about was like our philosophy of care. And I remember when we did our philosophy of care, I was like, we got to put boundaries on there. People need to know that we have boundaries. I was like super adamant about it because they're very important to me. Right. And I remember, I think it was Alyssa had said, you can look at that as compassion. And for family members, like, that's what you have to remember, is that you're not being mean to them when you say, okay, enough is enough, right?
Right.
You're simply telling them, I'm no longer going to participate in you killing yourself.
Right.
Right.
And that's different than tough love.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of parents who are like, oh, I'm all about tough love. Well,
Yeah.
the one guy that was doing tough love was beating his kid.
Right.
Another guy that was doing tough love was making him sleep outside because he thought that would cure the addiction.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, well, neither of those is effective. So
Right.
let's move into a space where we're actually creating a circumstance where you can be a support person and not add to the trauma. And
Right. And don't totally cut them off either, right? Like you can set boundaries and say, okay, well, I'm not comfortable with you being here alone, or I'm not comfortable loaning you money. I'm not comfortable leaving you with my kids, things like that. Let's say you call and, hey, can we go get a cup of coffee?
Yes.
Absolutely. We can go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to get help. Okay, let's look at what that looks like. Different things that you can do with them. And what I always say is, love them from a distance. Like, I'm still here and I love you, but I'm just not going to actively participate in this part of your life if this is what you're choosing to do.
Yeah, I need you to get healthy, and I'm not able to help.
Right.
I think it's tough for family members initially when you're having conversations with each other, trying to have conversations with someone that's active in addiction. There's a lot of shame when there's these consequences from their addiction. Maybe it's causing problems in the household. Maybe they've been arrested or had law enforcement involvement. And I think everyone's first reaction, the natural reaction, is just like, we gotta sweep this under the rug. Let's take care of it in house. And by take care of it in house, I think that just means a lot of people like not acknowledging it in the public and just kind of putting up the force field so that no one from the outside world is able to see this. And the problem with that is it ultimately leads to everyone in the family, whether they mean to or not, validating and enabling that behavior to continue because you don't have it. And there's a lot of stigma that comes with substance abuse and the mental health struggles that are usually the underlying cause of that. The worst thing you can do is try to put up the walls, and when you think you're protecting this individual, you're really just allowing them to continue in this addiction 9 times out of 10. Yeah. So,
and I mean, one of the things too that people don't understand is a lot of, addiction, a big symptom of addiction is isolation.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And just pulling yourself away from everybody. And if my family is now saying, I want nothing to do with you, that's only going to feed those negative core beliefs that I already have about myself. And I'm just going to keep digging myself into a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper hole.
Right.
And that Bryan, that's such an important point because that runs so parallel to suicide.
Right.
And we see people, when you were talking, Isaac, I thought about how many people I know whose children have had medical incidents that were related to an addiction. Yeah. And sometimes it's a suicide attempt and the family just cannot even acknowledge. Yeah. I come in as a behavioral health specialist and say, whoa, we don't ignore a suicide attempt, even if it was disguised as a drug overdose. Right. There's something wrong here. And that isolation, PR cover-up, if you will, the family PR cover-up, damage control. Right, the family damage control becomes part of the isolation because nobody will even acknowledge the depth of the problem. Right. And so I really want to say that it's important if you have kids that are in and out of a hospital case or overdosing and needing to be resuscitated or the part of that paradigm is a suicide attempt, and the isolation is part of the suicide symptomology. And so there's some parallels there that we just can't ignore. You can't. If you ignore them, you're leaving them on an island by themselves, sometimes with a weapon, right?
Yeah, and their weapon a lot of times is drugs and alcohol. And I had a friend who I truly believe he was very depressed, and he did, pass away over this last year. And I truly believe that it wasn't the plan, but there was a part of him that wanted it to be, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Because this guy was such a loving and caring person and just so insightful and impactful in other people's lives. But he he couldn't feel that for himself, right? He could give that to other people, but he couldn't feel that for himself.
That social piece
Yeah.
is so important, and wrapping that person around almost the requirement. And this is where the 12-step program is so powerful, because it becomes a tool for that insight. And you have to be willing to work the 12 steps, right? It's a personal journey, but part of that journey becomes being willing to accept not just that I don't have control, but that I'm worthy, that I matter, that I can come back eventually and help other people. Yeah. But I can't really help other people until I've worked the front end of that.
Until equation. I face it, right? Like it's never going to change. Nothing changes if nothing changes. And it's not going to change if I sit around and I collect days sober, right? It's not going to change if I just go to treatment and then I go back to my life and pretend like everything's okay. That's what I love about the 12-step program in general, is just, I've been to lots of different programs and sat with lots of different counselors with fancy plaques on their wall that would tell me, this is your problem, Bryan. This is what you need to do to fix this problem, right? And eventually I would always end up back in the same position. And then when I found the 12-step program, it's not, okay, do this 90-day program. This is my life now. Right. And you've taught me principles and values that I can carry throughout my life now. And that's, I think, is why the 12 steps are insanely impactful in people's recovery.
Yeah.
Going back to that idea of drugs and alcohol as the weapon, I think the most dangerous thing with that is it allows someone to not make a choice, right? They're not having to choose suicide. They're not having to choose, hey, I want to try to get into treatment and be involved in my recovery. It's just like, well, I'm going to keep doing this as, to moving along, stay in the same space, but get through, each day by day. And what happens. Right. It removes all your agency. Yeah. And if you're not willing to have those conversations with that individual, going back to the idea of what can family members do, your family friends too, has to have very real conversations with that individual. And it doesn't have to be, hey, you're really messing up here. You're making all of our lives worse. There can be elements of that, but what it should really boil down to is we love you. We care about you. We don't want to see you keep destroying yourselves. How can we help you get better? How can we help you be involved in your recovery and ultimately feel better about yourself? And that's what strikes me as being really powerful about the 12 steps is it's not just, this is how you stop drinking every day. This is how you stop being addicted to fentanyl. There's so much self-help and healing and life skills stuff in there. And it continue, like you said, Bryan, it's not just 90 days. This is the rest of my life. I'm going to be constantly improving myself and validating myself from a positive standpoint rather than a negative standpoint.
And you're not alone.
Right. Yeah. And I think Michelle says it all the time. You got to be willing to say the hard stuff. That was like the first thing I really took in really to heart when I first started working here, was you got to be willing to say the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And
it matters to people. The only way to really truly build trust with someone is to do the hard things. Right. You can do all the easy things you want. You can walk along, there's lots of little sort of quips and quotes about you walk along beside somebody, and those are all nice and they're friendly, but if somebody's doing something that is clearly in complete opposition to what their goals are, they have to have someone invested enough in them to say, this is the total opposite of what you're trying to do. Yeah. And sometimes that's hard because they go away when they don't want to hear you. And we don't want them to go away. No. But I believe that they'll always come back because they know that you'll answer them honestly. Right. You'll tell them the truth.
And that goes back to our philosophy of care, right? That's what you guys in case management are doing when you're having those hard conversations with clients that are really struggling with substance abuse a lot of time, or struggling with chronic homelessness. And maybe they haven't had that individual that's willing to have those hard conversations with them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down to like that compassion portion and the value portion of our philosophy of care. And that's really important. Like, yes, it's good to say the hard things. Yes, it's good to set boundaries, but there has to be some tactfulness and some compassion there, because you don't want to push somebody too far. Sure. If you heard anything, I hope that's what you hear. But yeah, I mean, I think too, what I wanted to say too about, having those conversations with those clients, if you're a client and you happen to hear this, please understand that if we did have that hard conversation with you, we did that because we care about you, and we're still here, right?
Yes.
We are still here. We always tell clients every time we have one of those conversations, this isn't a forever thing, right? This is, you have some issues that you need to address, or some things that you need to address. I don't like using issues.
Yeah.
But you have some things that you need to address, and I'll help you do that if you want me to help. Usually they get frustrated and they don't want that. But our whole thing is, we had that hard conversation with you, and, you know, it's been a couple weeks or it's been a month, and you've like kind of, okay, I can see this now and I want help. That's all we want from you. We want you to participate in your own life. That's it.
We don't want you to be perfect. We don't want you to come back to us fixed. You don't have to fix your whole self by yourself.
Or perfect. You know, people sometimes get this idea that they have to be better to come back, or that they're not worthy. That whole episode of feeling not worthy, that's part of anyone's recovery from, I think, anything. Life, right?
Life, yeah, for sure.
But I think that piece of it has to be there. That compassion is really anchored in being willing to connect with them in a caring, loving way, but say the hard things. And families can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Families can connect with their loved ones that are struggling with addiction and very compassionately say the hard things. I know I had a family member once, and I had to say, it hurts my heart to see you doing what you're doing. I'm not pulling away from you because I don't love you. I'm pulling away from you because I'm not able to help you, and it's painful. Yeah. It's very painful. Yeah. I want you to come to me if there's something that I can do, but right now I can't walk with you and watch you self-destruct.
Absolutely. And it's so hard for that. What they need to understand too is it's hard for that addict to understand that, right? Because they're so engulfed, you know, whether it be their trauma, their, you know what I mean, like their negative core beliefs, or just, you know, the things that they've learned over the years. They're so engulfed in that. And I always use the phrase, it's hard to see the forest through the trees, right? And they're like right up on that tree. Yeah. And they can't see. I know that I couldn't see the ripple effect of all that. Like, I had an idea. I was like, you know, my son, I don't want to do this to him. He's kind of getting this way. But I didn't realize that it like affected my sister or my brother, or that, you know, and it makes me cry, because it's like, I remember, like, I'll go into meetings and my brother will say, like, I don't have to worry about getting that phone call. And I never even thought about that. Yeah. Right. I never even thought that he cared, because I was just so engulfed in my own self that none of that even registered.
And for people who are listening, that's why you can have a complete heart-to-heart with somebody and break down with them and just say that boundary piece, the compassion and boundary piece. I can't do this part anymore. And their wrap up to the conversation is, but can I still have the $50?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And then they're just like, see, they just don't get it. They don't. Yeah. And then they just want to completely patience and compassion. Patience and compassion. It takes what it takes, you know, and you don't have to participate in that, but you can still be there for them, you know, and still love them. You know, the gentleman that I was talking about earlier, I didn't, you know, go out of my way to go hang out with him or anything like that. But when he called, I answered the phone, or I did the best to. And there was times where, I'm going to be real honest, there was times where I see that call and I'm like, because I knew, you know, because I knew what was happening, right? It's heavy, and it's hard, right? And you love that person. And you're like, man, I just want you to be better, just be better. And but just answer the phone, you know, as much as you possibly can. Don't like hurt yourself trying to do that. But if you got 5 minutes, just say, hey, okay, that's cool.
Listen. Sometimes they just need someone to listen. Yep. There have been so many times in those circumstances where I've just listened, and the person will talk until they hear their own nonsense for long enough that they either say, okay, I have to go, or they'll say, what I'm saying doesn't make sense, does it? Right. And so sometimes if you're just the listener, they'll talk and then hear themselves saying things that don't make sense, and they'll recognize that. But other times, like you said, it's just it's just a little heavy, and you just have to listen until you can't listen anymore. Absolutely. And understand that, you know, that the asking for money and the wanting support for things that are part of that addiction is that's part of the addiction. Yeah. And you can set a boundary with that and say, just because I won't give you money doesn't mean I don't love you. Sometimes it means I love you enough to say no, enough to say the hard things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on about this for days.
You don't have to do it alone.
Exactly.
You don't. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes, especially if it's a family member, it's tough to be that bad cop person. But that's why we have there are resources out there. Let Bryan be your bad cop is what I'm saying.
Right, yeah.
That's why Bryan gets paid the
We have
big
a whole
bucks.
staff
No,
of people that are good
but-
at being bad cops.
Yeah.
but
yeah.
the most important thing is that, like you said, Bryan, that you're there for them,
Mm-hmm.
and for that individual that's dealing with those demons. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to solve it all in one day. They don't have to fix themselves, or you don't have to fix them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't fix other
Yeah.
people, but if they're willing to work on themselves, if they just want that, even a little bit
Yeah.
at the core of themselves,
Right.
that is all that you need.
Yeah.
That
to
little
be-
crack in the door,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
You jam your foot in
absolutely,
there. Yeah.
For sure. And when I was about to talk and I took a pause, it was because I was like just empathizing for a second with any parent that has to go through that, right?
Ugh.
I've been fortunate to this point not to have to deal with that, right? But I can't imagine how hard that conversation would be. I've done it with friends, I've done it with cousins or whatever, but with your own child, I can only imagine, and I empathize for you. And so, yeah, like Isaac said, I just want to echo that, like, we're here for you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of people here for you, and there's lots of support out there. And, you know, we have worked with clients that have mental health, substance abuse, chronic homelessness, whatever it is, and help them get to where they want to be. And so, and even if we can't help them, we'll try our best to find somebody that can. You know, our whole thing is that we know shouldn't be the answer to, hey, I want help.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. There's also a piece there's a great book by Melanie Beatty called Codependent No More that is really a kind of an introduction to some of the philosophy that we're talking about. And it's a really nice way of kind of orienting yourself to some of the language of recovery and the family dynamics. But there are codependent meetings, CODA meetings in communities. And I know Al-Anon. I have a cousin who was married to an alcoholic addict for 15 years, I think. And he got into recovery, but he got into recovery because of a choice that she made. She just said, you know, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. And she called me about 6 months maybe after that and said, I know that you told me to go to these meetings years ago, and I just never would because I thought, well, that's not me. I'm not a group person. That isn't going to help. And she said, I just went there really to listen. But she said 6 months later, I'm thinking about starting my own group because this was so powerful and life-changing for me. And she said, I felt angry and resentful. And what I said was, I'm not the one with the problem. Why do I have to go to meetings? And I thought that was so important. That's such an important aspect of helping somebody with an addiction. No, you're not the person with the problem, but you live with the problem. And there are people out there that have walked your walk and that can help you. You're not alone.
Yeah.
That isolation again.
Yeah. It's a heavy bag. I remember how that was all explained to me. I was sitting outside of High Noon, and this gentleman, he was like, I want you to imagine that I have a backpack on. And he grabbed on the ground was like these little rocks, and he grabbed a handful of them. And he was like, okay, I want you to picture that this is a little bit of envy. It's not a lot. It's just a little bit. This is a little bit of resentment. This is a little bit of pride. This is a little bit of egos, all these different things, right? And then he said, okay, now I'm just going to throw them in my backpack. And I'll just leave them there, and I'll let them sit there for a while. He's like, but you go through life and you continue to grab these little pebbles and you're throwing them in your backpack. You're just like, okay, whatever, we're moving on because that's life, right? We just got to keep moving forward. And so I'm just throwing them in my backpack. Eventually that backpack is too heavy to carry on your own.
Yeah.
You know, and that was so huge for me because I'm a manly man and I don't need no help, right? I don't need to talk about nothing.
But isn't that an Alaska thing?
Yeah,
Even
it really
women.
is. Yeah,
I mean, the culture here is you're tough, you're hard. It's 6 below zero. You go start your car, you go to work. You know, it's not easy. There's no easy button, right? No. And so I think that's part of the culture here, and I think it makes it hard, one, for people to reach out for help and accept it, but also for the family members to get help because that's not my backpack.
Right.
I didn't load that backpack up. I'm not.
But you're wearing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter
and I
whose
got my own
backpack it is.
backpack,
You're the
right?
one that's wearing it.
I got my own backpack, and I got rocks that are based on what your relationship with me that I put in my backpack, right?
Exactly.
And so I really like that analogy, and I think that's a powerful statement about how that impacts everyone in the family and in the community.
Yeah. You never know, man. You never know who's going to be that person to, just change. Just like it's like that mind blowing moment, right? Like that gentleman that told me that I don't talk to anymore. Like I don't like him. You know what I mean? I don't. But when I came into recovery, it was told to me, take what you want and leave the rest.
Yep.
Right. And so even people that you don't get along with, people, just keep an open mind and listen. And when you go and get that support, if you keep an open mind and you actually listen to what is being said, you'll be absolutely amazed about the level of support and how much lighter that bag can get.
Yes. And there's really, I like to think about it as mythbusters. There's a lot of myths that we carry about ourselves and our families and even our community. What help is available, right? People come in and say, there's no help available. There's no treatment. And I'm like, Are you kidding me?
It's so,
There's more treatment and peer support in this community than I would put this against any place in the country.
Absolutely. Even when I got here at first, it was crazy. Like I got into treatment within a week and it wasn't even what it is now.
Right.
Like that's a total miracle that I was in treatment within a week, landed long-term residential treatment.
It's so awesome.
Yeah.
And so I think those myths that we tell ourselves end up in our backpack. I think that the myths that we perceive about our community impact our willingness to get help, but they are also part of that conversation around boundaries and compassion, that if the person is telling you there's no treatment, there's nowhere to go, there's no help, if you're talking to somebody like you, Bryan, that's going to blow that right up, because we know all the places that you can plug in. If you have no money and no Medicaid and no insurance, then you go to a 12-step meeting and they're 24 hours a day, right?
Absolutely.
We can bring a peer support person in to just sit and chat with you to try to help you navigate some of that.
There is a crisis team now.
There's a mobile crisis team, right? I had the greatest experience. I'm going to shout out to the mobile crisis team right now, because last summer we had a young man in here that kind of lost his mind a little bit and was yelling, and we walked outside, and by the time we walked outside, the police had already been called because he was a little edgy. And what I really wanted him to do was go to the day one stabilization center and just get back on track, get back on top. And so we were sitting out there talking when the police rolled up, and we know them. It's small town, and we do a lot of interaction with the police. And so it was like, hey, how's it going, Joe? And he said, okay, what's going on here? It doesn't seem like there's a big crisis right now. And I said, well, the question I'm asking our client is, would you rather go with Joe or would you rather go to the day one crisis stabilization center? And he goes, yeah, I need to go to day one. It was like he knew that he needed to go there, but he just wasn't able to harness that energy and channel it in that direction until the cops showed up. And the officer was so great. He was like, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm going to stay until they show up, but I'm glad that you're safe. I'm glad that everything is okay. And I'm glad you're going to the day one center. Yeah. And that's really another piece of that puzzle, that community wraparound where everybody has an understanding of what's available and how we treat people. Yeah. That was the cop participating in our philosophy of care.
Absolutely.
That was the day one center. Then the day one people pulled into the parking lot. The young lady that got out of the passenger seat called the kid by name, and he came over and hugged her. Yeah. And he got in the back seat and went with them. And I was like, I could not imagine a better outcome for that scenario.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens. When we all come together as a community and as organizations, that's when clients can really have significant breakthroughs, not just like we accomplished a goal or we did that. Like they can, change the whole trajectory of their life and start really going upwards if we all provide that wraparound care.
Yes. So important. Well, I feel like this was a terrific precursor for that special edition, the 12-step program info and the limited series that we're going to be showcasing a little bit later this spring. Thank you for listening. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Bryan and Isaac for being here. The My House podcast is recorded at the My House studio in Wasilla, Alaska. Our producer and editor is Isaac Smolden and Ozzy. And I'm Michelle Overstreet. Until next time.